Now, you've probably seen older reviews of the 9800X3D from the mainstream tech tubers and even those max overclockers, right? However, if you're a normal person like me, you probably don't have the best motherboards, the best RAM kits, or even a 4090, right? So, on a real world scenario, if you're going to be upgrading to the 9800X3D, you might be pairing this with a OK B650 motherboard, a decent RAM kit, and maybe one of your cards that's realistic, like for 1080p, that would be the RTX 3060, 12 GB, and for 1440p and 4K, that might be the RTX 3080, 10 GB. So, the best way to test our CPU performance would be through our multiplayer shooting games wherein response times and consistent frame pacing is very critical. And to make things interesting, we're also going to compare our 9800X3D against the AM4 Legend, which is the 5800X3D. Let's see if it's actually worth it upgrading to AM5 because of the 9800X3D's performance on a real-world scenario. Alright, this one's going to be a long video, guys, but I promise this is definitely worth it. Okay, let's start with some 1080p gameplay videos before going head-to-head with the 5800X3D. As always, we're using a second PC with a capture card to record all these benchmarks, so there's no performance loss. What you see is definitely what you're getting. Take note, any gameplay benchmarks which uses an internal recording like Shadowplay or Relive will always affect actual frame pacing. Now, while you're watching throughout our gameplay, try to focus on the frame time charts. This is a visual representation of stuttering in game. The more erratic this is, the more stuttery it is in game. First up is Warzone. We have delayed our video release because we were waiting for Black Ops 6 integration in Warzone, which has happened last week. I think you would love the new Warzone. They have removed a lot of the stuttering performance which we experienced with Warzone Modern Warfare 3. You will feel that this is much smoother. In game, we're actually getting about 130 to 140 FPS. Lows are at around 100, and frame times is mostly consistent with some occasional minor frame time spikes. You will be GPU bound here, but our 9800X3D is working hard. Let's see how this performs against the 5800X3D later on. In Apex Legends, once again, a pretty decent experience. We are GPU bottleneck again. Frame times is very consistent even on heavy action scenes. FPS is around 200 with lows at 120. Our 9800X3D is actually pushing power here to 105 watts and pushing those temperatures all the way up to 77 degrees. Overall, you would find that this is actually a good gaming experience. Moving on to Fortnite. This one's a pretty competitive game, and if you're a Fortnite builder, having that really high FPS is critical for those build fights. With the 9800X3D in performance mode 1080p, we are not bottlenecked by our 3060, which means you'd find that the Ryzen 9800X3D is going to push those really high frame rates. I really like this one too. We're getting 500 plus FPS. Frame times is mostly stable with the occasional micro stutter, but this is normal for Fortnite. CPU power is at 100 watts, and this is just amazing, boys. Valorant is another fast-paced shooter which pushes our Ryzen 9800X3 for that sweet FPS. In competitive settings, we are not bottlenecked by the 3060, and therefore we're also able to reach really high FPS all the way up to 600. This one's pretty cool too. The 9800X3D is just sitting at around 60 degrees and only utilizing about 85 watts of power. Now, let's move back to the games which require more GPU capability. First up, we have PUBG. This is 1080p, DX11 enhanced competitive settings. And you will find that although we are limited by the GPU here, we are still able to push really high FPS. Up to 90 watts on the CPU power and not that hot compared to our other games at around 70 degrees. Next up, is Helldivers 2, and in here you will be limited by the GPU, right? This is just something with their engine. This is 1080p with medium settings. The game looks good with all the explosions, which is correctly so. At super Helldive difficulty, you're getting a lot of bug spawns and you will be getting FPS at around 60. Now CPU power is around 75 watts and it remains cool at 60 degrees. Now this isn't a PvP game, so this performance is good enough. Obviously you can tone down the settings wherein you'll be able to pull more performance, but yeah, that just depends on your preference. Going back to more slower paced game, we have Arena Breakout Infinite. We now have Season 1. And once again, in this game, you will be GPU bottleneck, especially in the valley map, wherein there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of vegetation, and really extreme draw distances. You'll be getting around 90 FPS with some micro stutters, but I think this is because we are clearly limited by the RTX 3060 12GB card here. It will be interesting to see how it goes when we go up to the RTX 3080 10GB later on. When we go head-to-head with the AM4 Legend, the 5800X3D, you will find that in Warzone that even though you are limited by the GPU, the 9800X3D is able to push the lows here. This is actually impressive. It is consuming more power and running slightly hotter, but considering the gains, I think this is worth it. In Apex Legends, however, it seems like there isn't much gain here when we are on static scenes. When we do get into heavier action scenes, I think this is more or less the same. Once again, you're really not getting much gains here. This follows the traditional pathway wherein if there's a GPU bottleneck across the board, everything else is just limited. But in hindsight, you would actually consume more power with the 9800X3D over the 5800X3D. Moving on to our high refresh games, here we have Fortnite performance mode, and you can see considerable difference between the two processors. These are 2 generations apart, and you can see how much better third generation is in terms of lows and raw FPS, right? The 9800X3D is just killing it here, no questions. Significant difference, definitely worth thinking about. And Valorant, it's quite interesting. Yes, you'll be getting better lows with the 9800X3D, however, the raw FPS still favors the older 5800X3D. In heavy action scenes, this is still the same scenario, and if you ask me, having better lows with consistent performance would be a much better choice here. In PUBG, you'll continue to see that the 9800X3D is still able to push our 3060 for better frames and much better lows, and I think this is a considerable uplift versus the older 5800X3D. Helldivers 2's performance follows the same traditional GPU bottleneck pathway. The performance is more or less the same between the two processors. It's probably not worth upgrading if you're playing this game with an RTX 3060. Now, speaking of which, if you currently have an RTX 3060 and seeing all of this, would you consider upgrading to the 9800X3D, or would you rather upgrade your GPU instead? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm really interested on what you would do. Okay, let's move on to 1440p gameplays. This time around, we are pairing the 9800X3D with the RTX 3080. Let's start with Warzone 1440p native resolution, no upscaling, and it's quite a decent performance here despite being GPU bottleneck. You can see that our 9800X3D is working much harder here and is able to put out more frames and running a much higher wattage compared to our previous run with the 3060. You can find that this is a decent experience. You get about 150 to 190 FPS in this scenario. Yes, you can enable DLSS to give you more headroom for the GPU. However, we might do that later on at 4K. Apex Legends is definitely a different scenario. We are not bottlenecked by the 3080 here, even at 1440p, and because of that, we're able to push really high frame rates and even get to maxing out at times. However, FPS does drop when we get into the fix. Let's see how this one turns out versus the 5800X3D later on. Fortnite remains to be very good even at 1440p performance mode. We are truly getting really high FPS on this game. Build fights are pretty smooth, and once again, you would find that the 9800X3D is able to push those frames really hard. Valorant remains to be in the same situation. We're clearly able to get 600 to 700 FPS depending on the scene, but really smooth experience can't complain. But I really can't complain. You'll definitely need this processor if you want to reach the Radiant rank. However, in saying that, it will be interesting to see if there's any difference when we match this up with the 5800 X3D later on. PUBG and 1440p is likewise a good experience. With the 3080, you will not be bottlenecked by the GPU, and therefore our 9800 X3D can also push for higher frames. Look at that, 250 FPS. Truly amazing processor. We do have some spikes here, but this is pretty normal for PUBG and its game engine. At 1440p with Helldivers 2, even with the 3080, we are still bottlenecked by the GPU. Now, in saying that, we are now able to get slightly higher FPS compared to our 1080p run with the 3060. Even with multiple effects and explosions, we're able to get a really good experience here. Let's see if there's any improvement versus the 5800 X3D later on. Arena Breakout Infinite is clearly the same as well. We are bottlenecked by the 3080 at 1440p native. Yes, you can enable DLSS if you want more frames. However, you are already getting 160 FPS in this game, and I think this is actually a good experience. Okay, let's move back to comparing our 9800 X3D against the AM4 Legion and see if running at 4040p resolution with that RTX 3080 10GB will have a difference. First up is Warzone, and like before, we are seeing a sizable difference here, especially with the lows in favor to the 9800 X3D. So yeah, if you're into Warzone, this is actually worth considering. I didn't have enough time to test with DLSS turned on. I'm pretty sure the lead will expand as we become less GPU bottleneck. I might do that in a future video. Apex Legends seems fairly the same, once again on static scenes. When we move to heavier scenes, you'd see different behavior here. I don't know if you can see that, but the 9800 X3D is slightly more stable here. Slightly. Now, I know there is a margin of error, but yeah, you can feel that here. Fortnite with the 3080 still follows the same trend as before. We're definitely getting better results with a newer processor on both raw FPS and the lows. Is this worth considering for you? Maybe. In Valorant, we now see that the 9800 X3D is finally able to pull through all metrics. Besides better lows like before, you are now able to get better raw FPS too, unlike with our 3060. The lead isn't that much though in the running benchmark, but it does get more amplified once we get into the heavier scenes, as you can see here. And PUBG, once again, we're getting that noticeable lead with the 9800 X3D. Look at lows, more specifically the 0.1% lows. That is huge. In heavy action scenes, it is still the same scenario. You would find that the 9800 X3D is the clear winner here. With Helldivers 2, however, you'd see that it's pretty similar. You would argue that the 9800 X3D is slightly better, but this is more or less margin of error. So if you're a super Helldiver with a 3080, getting the 9800 X3D is definitely impractical. Now, I know there's a very limited amount of my viewers who play at 4K. However, I thought I'd include this here for our test. We'll quickly go through these before I move on to scaling amongst all three resolutions and some temperature testings as well. Now, at 4K with DLSS in Warzone, the lead of the 9800 X3D gets minimized compared to the other resolution, but the lows remain to be better. Interestingly, with Apex Legends, I don't know why the 5800 X3D is slightly better here. However, this could just be margin of error on my end. Fortnite remains the same. You'd find that the 9800 X3D is still better compared to the 5800 X3D at 4K performance mode, which is the same for Valorant. The lead is not huge anymore as we hit GPU bottleneck. Don't get me wrong, the 9800 X3D is still a better processor, but by not much. In PUBG, it seems like the 9800 X3D is still in the lead. However, you'd find that it's not as high as before. And likewise with Helldivers 2, you would see that it's more or less the same performance, which is probably what you'd get if you're into single player games. As I've said before, definitely not worth upgrading to if you're just playing Helldivers 2. Might as well put that money into better graphics card. Okay, I'm just going to run scaling between all three resolutions here in the background. Now, there are definitely games which would benefit when we upgrade our processor to the 9800 X3D on a real-world scenario with real-world components. The biggest gains are definitely on our competitive games. However, you would still see that games like Warzone would still benefit from it even though you are bottlenecked by your graphics card. Is it worth upgrading to the 9800 X3D? And I suppose it depends, right? It depends on your budget and if you're wanting to get those better lows at a cost. Anyway, since we've already bought this, we might as well use this for our future benchmarking videos. And if you like videos like these, subscribe to the channel. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.